Today we're going to look at Unit 2B Quadratics Study Guide. We're going to focus on number 1 through 10. So for this quiz, you need to be able to solve by factoring. So solving quadratics by factoring, simplify complex numbers with operations, solve quadratics by using square roots, solve quadratics by completing the square, and then last but not least, write quadratic equations from standard form into vertex form. And part of that process will be completing the square. So we're going to go through each of these examples together, and then the second half, 11 through 20, are problems that are very similar. So use this as a guide to help you solve the second half of your study guide. So for number 1, it says solve the equation by factoring. Okay, so in order to factor, I need to get everything to one side. So I need to move this 36 to the right-hand side. So I'm going to add 36 to both sides to start. So now I'm going to have x squared plus 15x plus 36 equals 0. So now that left-hand side, I need to go factor. So I need to look at factors of 36 that add up to 15. Both my b and c terms are positive, so both my factors will be positive. So I'll have x plus and x plus. Factors of 36, you could have 1 times 36, 2 times 18, 3 times 12, 4 times 9, and then 6 times 6. The factors that add up to 15 will be 3 and 12. So I'm going to have x plus 3 and x plus 12. After I factor, I set my factors equal to 0 and solve. So I have x plus 3 equals 0 and x plus 12 equals 0. First equation, I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. So I get x equals negative 3. That's my first solution. Second equation, I need to subtract 12 from both sides. So x equals negative 12 is my second solution. So my two solutions for number 1 are negative 3 and negative 12. So again, first step, get everything to one side. Factor, set your factors equal to 0, and solve. For number 2, I have 3x squared plus x minus 14 equals 0. Everything is already on one side of this equation, so I'm going to go ahead and factor that left-hand side. So I need to look at factors of 3, factors of 14, then my outer plus inner needs to equal 1. Now my c term is negative, so that means my factors of 14, 1 needs to be positive and 1 needs to be negative. So factors of 3, you could have 1 times 3, that's your only option. For 14, you could do 1 and 14 and 2 and 7. If you do 1 and 14, you're going to get very large numbers. Our outer plus inner needs to be 1, so it needs to be really small. So I'm going to go ahead and try 2 times 7. Now one of them needs to be negative, so I'm going to use negative 2. So now I'm going to do my outer, 1 times 7, which gives me 7, times my inner, 3 times negative 2 will give me negative 6. 7 plus negative 6 will give me 1, which is what I wanted. So I am going to go factor now. So I'm going to set up my two sets of parentheses, and this equals 0. My first numbers, my factors of 3 are the coefficient of x. So I'm going to have 1x in my first set of parentheses, 3x in the second. My factors of 14 are the number piece of my factors. Negative 2 or minus 2 goes in the first set of parentheses, and then positive 7 plus 7 will go in my second set. So my factored form is 1x minus 2 times 3x plus 7 equals 0. Now I want to set my factors equal to 0 and solve. So I'm going to have x minus 2 equals 0 and 3x plus 7 equals 0. So to solve x minus 2 equals 0, I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So I'm going to have x equals 2. That's my first solution. Second equation, I need to subtract 7 from both sides first. So I'm going to have 3x equals negative 7. Then divide both sides by 3. So I get x equals negative 7 over 3. Now I would leave your answer as a fraction here. If you change it to a decimal, you're going to get a repeating decimal. So leave it as -7/3. So now we're going to look at 3. 3, we are going to simplify the expression. We have imaginary numbers here. So here I have 8 plus 6i in parentheses minus, in parentheses, 7 minus 4i. So in between my parentheses, I have that subtraction sign. I am subtracting these values from each other. So first thing I'm going to do is distribute this subtraction sign to each piece in this second set of parentheses. So now I'm going to have 8 plus 6i minus 7, and then negative times a negative 4i gives me a positive 4i. Now I need to combine my like terms. So my constants, my numbers are like terms. So 8 minus 7, that's going to give me 1. And then my imaginary numbers are like terms. 6i plus 4i gives me 10i. So my answer is 1 plus 10i. For number 4, we're also going to simplify the expression. This time we have 3 minus 4i times the quantity 2 plus 3i. Notice these parentheses here, they are right next to each other in the middle. Okay, there's no operation. When parentheses are right next to each other, we are multiplying. So for this one, we need to FOIL. So I'm going to do my first, outer, inner, last. First, 3 times 2 gives me 6. Outer, 3 times 3i will give me 9i. Inner, negative 4i times 2 will give me negative 8i. And then last, negative 4i times 3i. Negative 4 times 3 will give me negative 12. I times I will give me I squared. So now I'm going to go ahead and combine my like terms. 9 minus 8i. So I'm going to have 6. 9 minus 8i gives me 1i. So plus I. And then I have minus 12. Now this I squared, we can never leave powers of I in our answer. So you need to remember your rules. So I squared equals negative 1. So I'm going to go ahead and substitute in negative 1 for I squared. So now I have 6 plus I. Negative 12 times negative 1 will give me a positive 12. And now I need to combine my like terms one last time. 6 plus 12 gives me 18. So I'm going to have 18 plus I as my answer. So now we're going to go ahead and look at example 5. 5 and 6 we are solving by using square roots. Okay, when we go to solve by square roots, we always want to get whatever's being squared by itself first. Then take the square root of both sides. So for 5, I have x plus 4 quantity squared equals negative 64. Now, what's being squared here is this left-hand side, okay, already by itself. So my next step is going to be to take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to take the square root of x plus 4, quantity squared, equals, right-hand side, don't forget your plus or minus, square root of negative 64. Left-hand side, square root of x plus 4 squared is going to be x plus 4, equals, plus or minus, square root of negative 64. The negative tells me I'm going to have an I. 64 is a perfect square. Square root of 64 is 8. So I'm going to have plus or minus 8i. Now I need to get x by itself. So the opposite of adding 4 is to subtract 4 from both sides. So I'm going to have x equals, this right-hand side, the plus or minus 8i and negative 4 I cannot add together. I'm going to put the negative 4 in front, and then I have negative 4 plus or minus 8i. So that's going to be your solution. So this means you have negative 4 plus 8i and negative 4 minus 8i. For number 6, I have 4x squared plus 36 equals 0. I want to get the term with x squared by itself first. So I want to get 4x squared by itself. So the opposite of adding 36 is to subtract 36. So I'm going to have 4x squared equals negative 36. Now I need to get x squared by itself. So it's 4 times x squared. So the opposite of multiplying is to divide. I'm going to divide both sides by 4. So now I have x squared equals negative 36 divided by 4 gives me negative 9. Now my x squared is by itself, so I can take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to take the square root of x squared equals plus or minus the square root of negative 9. Square root of x squared is x equals plus or minus square root of negative 9. 9's a perfect square. Square root of 9 is 3. Negative tells me I'm going to have an I. So my answer is plus or minus 3i. So positive 3i and negative 3i are my solutions. 7 and 8, we are going to solve by completing the square. So for completing the square, we have 5 steps. First step, you're isolating your ax squared plus bx. Second step, you're creating a perfect square trinomial. Add that value to both sides. Step 3, you're factoring that perfect square trinomial. Write it as a quantity squared. Step 4, take the square root of both sides. Don't forget your plus or minus. And then step 5, solve for x. So for number 7, first I'm getting my ax squared plus bx by itself. So I need to subtract 11 from both sides. So now I'm going to have x squared plus 2x equals negative 11. The left-hand side, I need to create a perfect square trinomial. So I'm going to take my b value, 2. I need to do b over 2 squared. So my b is 2. So I'm going to have 2 over 2 squared. 2 over 2 equals 1. 1 squared is equal to 1. So that means I need to add 1 to both sides. So I'm going to have x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals negative 11 plus 1. Left-hand side, I now factor, okay? Write it as a quantity squared. So this factors to x plus 1 squared. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 plus 1 gives me 2. Right-hand side, negative 11 plus 1 gives me negative 10. Now my squared is by itself, so I follow my square root rules. Now I go take the square root of both sides. So square root of x plus 1 squared equals plus or minus square root of negative 10. Square root of x plus 1 squared is x plus 1 equals plus or minus square root of negative 10. 10 is not a perfect square. There's no perfect square that goes into 10, but that negative tells me I'm going to have an I. So I'm going to pull out I. So now I still have 10 under the radical symbol. So now my very last step, I need to get x by itself. Okay, so the opposite of adding 1 is I need to subtract 1 from both sides. And I know I kind of ran out of space here, so I'm going to write my answer over here in a second. When I subtract 1, left-hand side, I'm going to be left with x equals. On this right-hand side, okay, I cannot add those together. I need to just put that negative 1 in front. So I'm going to have negative 1 plus or minus I root 10. So my answer is x equals negative 1 plus or minus I root 10. So that means I have negative 1 plus I root 10 and negative 1 minus I root 10. For step 8, we are going to solve the equation by completing the square. So I have x squared minus 12x equals negative 20. First step is to get your ax squared plus bx by itself. So my x squared minus 12x already by itself. So now I'm going to go create my perfect square trinomial. My b value is 12. So I'm going to do 12 over 2 squared. 12 over 2 equals 6. 6 squared equals 36. So I have to add that to both sides. So I'm going to have x squared minus 12x plus 36 equals negative 20 plus 36. Left-hand side is a perfect square trinomial. My b is negative, so that means my factors are going to be negative. When I factor this, factors of 36 that add up to 12 are 6 and 6. So I'm going to have x minus 6 quantity squared equals negative 20 plus 36 gives me 16. Now I'm going to go take the square root of both sides. So square root of x minus 6 squared equals plus or minus the square root of 16. Square root of x minus 6 squared gives me x minus 6, and plus or minus square root of 16 equals 4. To get x by itself, opposite of subtracting 6 is to add 6 to both sides. So now I'm going to have x equals, right-hand side I cannot add together because of that plus or minus. I'm just going to put that plus 6, a positive 6 in front. So 6 plus or minus 4. Now, 6 plus or minus 4 can be simplified because I have no imaginary numbers or no radicals left. So I'm going to set up my two cases. First case with addition, so 6 plus 4. Second case with subtraction, 6 minus 4. So first case, 6 plus 4 is 10. So that's my first solution. Second case, 6 minus 4 is 2. So my two solutions are 10 and 2. 9 and 10, I'm going to write the equation in vertex form, and then we're going to state the vertex. So first thing, your equation needs to be in standard form. Then we're going to complete the square. So we're going to look at our value of b. So do b over 2 squared. We are going to add that value, but also do the opposite, so we're not changing the value of the equation. So essentially, we're going to be adding 0. Then we'll factor that perfect square trinomial to write it in vertex form. And then from there, we can identify our vertex. So first, I'm going to create a perfect square trinomial with x squared plus 14x. So I'm going to look at my b value, 14. So I'm going to do b over 2 squared. So 14 over 2 squared, which gives me 7 squared, which equals 49. So for my perfect square trinomial, I'm going to have x squared plus 14x, and I need to add 49 to that. Now, I still have that plus 30, and now since I added 49, I need to do the opposite of that. Opposite of adding 49 is to subtract 49. So now I'm going to go ahead and factor this perfect square trinomial. So x squared plus 14x plus 49. Write it as a quantity squared. So this is going to factor to x plus, everything's positive, factors of 49 that add up to 14, 7 and 7. So x plus 7, quantity squared. And then plus 30 minus 49, so 30 minus 49 gives us negative 19. So now my equation is in vertex form. So now I can go identify my vertex. My vertex is my h comma k. Remember, inside lies. So when I go look at my h value, it says plus 7. So I need to think opposite. Opposite of plus 7, negative 7. Then my k value is going to be negative 19. So my vertex is negative 7, comma, negative 19. For 10, doing the same thing, write it in vertex form, state the vertex. So first I'm going to look at my ax squared plus bx. So that's 4x squared minus 8x. Before I can go and find my b, my x squared term needs to have a coefficient of 1. Has a coefficient of 4 right now. So first thing I need to do is go factor out a GCF. So 4 and 8, the GCF is 4. So I'm going to have y equals 4. And then parentheses x squared minus 8 divided by 4 is 2. So 2x. And that minus 9 is still on the outside. Now, what's left in those parentheses, I'm going to create a perfect square trinomial. So I'm going to take my value of b, which is 2. I'm going to do b over 2 squared. 2 over 2 equals 1. 1 squared is equal to 1. So I need to add 1 inside those parentheses. So I'm going to have y equals 4, x squared minus 2x, and I'm adding 1. And then I still have minus 9 on the outside. Now, because I added 1 inside those parentheses, I also have to do the opposite on the outside to create a 0. So I'm not changing the value of the equation. But since I pulled out this 4 here, 4 times 1 means I'm technically adding 4. So on the outside, the opposite of adding 4 is to subtract 4. So plus 4 minus 4 gives me 0. So now I'm going to go ahead and factor that perfect square trinomial. So what's inside the parentheses? So I'm still going to have y equals 4 on the outside. My b term's negative, so I'm going to have x minus factors of 1 that add up to 2, 1 and 1. So I'm going to have x minus 1 quantity squared. Then negative 9 minus 4 gives me negative 13. So now I'm going to go write my vertex. My h value is inside my parentheses. It says negative 1, but remember inside lies, so opposite of negative 1 is 1. And then my k value is going to be negative 13. So my vertex is 1, negative 13.